Hello, reality sandwich community. Kyle, one of your favorite conscious agents, back with another insightful, deep, share your experience interview. I'm joined by the wonderful Denver, Colorado based Greg Shankin. Greg, how's it going today?
Going great. Great to be here.
Wonderful. Love the hat. Empathic, excited to, we got connected and have you share your experience here. So could you give our audience a brief introduction to yourself? Do you work in the plant medicine space? What made you feel called to share with us today?
Yes. So I was called into this work about 3 years ago after my first ayahuasca experience. And coming out of that experience, I just was absolutely blown away and mystified, and my whole world was rocked. And I became kind of voracious about learning what just happened to me and how that fits into this whole psychedelic healing realm, and just started devouring books and podcasts, and kind of been like on an overdrive ever since, through personal work and advocacy work and nonprofit work and for-profit work. So my whole life is basically focused in this space.
Beautiful. Sounds like an amazing journey for sure. Denver and Colorado in general seems to be a mecca. That's where really they spearheaded the medical cannabis movement and got that online pretty quickly. And now they seem to really be embracing psychedelics. How did you get involved or build the community there? And how important is community for this industry as it evolves?
Yeah, great question. So when I came back from my first ayahuasca retreat, um, as I mentioned, I just kind of really started diving in, and the timing was uh, perfect because the Prop 122 Natural Medicine Health Act, as it was called before, was already underway. And so that summer, I became an ambassador for the bill, and I did quite a few things in terms of my presence and passion to serve this space. Number one, I got involved in Get Out the Vote efforts, so I started publicly sharing my story for the first time, which was way outside my comfort zone. But I learned that it was actually healing for me, and that the value of these stories, just like we're doing now. So I applaud the work you're doing, and you have so many incredible stories on your site on Reality Sandwich. So it's the stories is what really moves this movement forward. And even during the campaign, it was TV ads from veterans and from people struggling from depression, and so part of that was kind of the story sharing that I started doing, get out the vote efforts like text messaging campaigns, and that one was kind of fun because it's actually not legal to put in a database of a million phone numbers and hit a button to text, but you are allowed to use a software platform and go like this one by one. So literally, just doing that. And at the time, I was still struggling with depression, so some days literally just depressed and going like this. And I learned at the end I was the number one texter. I sent out 19,000 text messages, so
Oh
what an
wow.
honor. But more importantly than my text messaging and finger tapping prowess is that the bill passed to 53%, which by today's standards is a landslide, even in Colorado. And I live in Boulder, but Boulder, Denver is kind of a blue bubble within a lot of red outlying areas. So 53% was still a landslide. And the bill passed, and now here we are 2.5 years later, and healing centers are soon to be opening in the next several months. So it's a fun time to be in Colorado, and especially as we start to move into the Psychedelic Science Maps conference coming up in June.
What about you think Colorado attracts this community? Why are they so much more embracing about these medicines versus even California, where I'm having a tough time passing bills like this?
Yeah. I mean, Colorado, we moved here after Hurricane Sandy in 2013, and we are from the Northeast, and we were ready to move. It was actually Hurricane Sandy that became the kind of the final straw for us. And we knew we loved the area and the region, but we couldn't live it firsthand until we were living it firsthand. And so, um, right out of the gate, we just were able to see kind of the open mindedness and the free thinking spirit and I'm speaking in the Boulder, Denver area, which some people call Boulder the Boulder bubble. Because I think we're a purple state, and I think we've voted blue in the past several elections. But I think it's just the open-mindedness here. It's the openness to natural health. Boulder, I think, was ranked the healthiest city in the country. So it really is a ripe place. And also, well, in 2019, decrim for psilocybin passed in Denver. So that really helped set the stage for the statewide model that's being rolled out now, where there's actually a path for legalized usage of psilocybin on the personal use side, and then soon to be on the regulated use side. So Colorado is just it's a perfect place for this next stage of this um, legislative movement, coming on the heels of Oregon, which they were the first, and so grateful to them, and we're the second, and they're making mistakes, and so are we, but we're all learning from each other, and hopefully state number 3, which looks like it might be New Mexico at the time of this recording, we'll see, and then hopefully we'll just keep growing, just like we've seen in the cannabis space.
Were you a big like cannabis user as a teenager? How did you even get introduced to these plant medicines and this culture? And then what were the details in you finally taking that first step and doing that first ayahuasca ceremony?
Yeah. So similar to so many people who share these stories, the old, yes, smoked pot as a teenager and did mushrooms at concerts in college. And so recreationally has always been in my orbit. And even before knowing the spiritual side of this and the healing side, I definitely had some deeply moving experiences with mushrooms. And yeah, cannabis I'm a kind of a moderate recreational user, so I wouldn't say that led into my plant medicine path, but it certainly kind of kept me open minded to that. And so the way I came into this was that my struggles with depression and struggled with that most of my adult life, and had been on SSRI meds for about 12 years leading up to kind of where I changed paths. And for me, the SSRI meds, I put in quotes, worked because they helped with the depression symptoms. That's what they're designed to do. But I came to learn the price I was paying for being on these meds. And I don't condemn prescription meds. I'm always quick to say that, because if they're working and you can live with the side effects and you're happy, great. I don't take kind of that extreme view of it. But I did start to realize that I was hitting a brick wall in my life and my career. And so I went into therapy, and it happened to be IFS, internal family systems, also known as parts therapy. Ironically, at the time, I didn't even know what that meant. And I say ironically because my parents are retired psychiatrists and psychologists, so they hadn't heard of it either. But I didn't blame them because they don't practice every day like they used to. So, and also at the time, I didn't know how well it elegantly it pairs with psychedelic healing. And so in one of my first sessions, I shared some challenge or feeling I was having, and my therapist said, "So, Greg, where do you feel this in your body?" And that question didn't even compute. I just kind of remember looking at her like she had 3 heads, like, I don't have a headache. Nobody punched me in the arm. I'm not feeling anything in my body. And I came to learn that was something that was a wake up call. So she helped me see that these meds were basically keeping me disembodied. I was essentially operating from the neck up, and kind of all left brain and all cognitive, and not tapping into my intuition and not tapping into so many of the gifts we have as a whole bodied individual. And so that started leading me down a path of exploring plant medicine. And I was fortunate enough to have a really good friend who's a psychedelic healing coach from Oregon, and he started just kind of educating me on some of the options and actually referred me into my first retreat. So that's kind of how it all led up. And of course, I had to get off the SSRI meds leading up to that retreat. I had tried two previous times to do that just on its own and had terrible results. Depression would come back. This time was different because I had this, very important kind of milestone retreat ceremony on the books, and I was prepping for it. And um, so leading up to that retreat during those 3 weeks I cried twice. Once was an emotional movie. Once was literally just listening to a beautiful, poignant song, and music's a huge part of my life. But the reason I mention that is because the previous 12 years to that, I cried maybe a handful of times, roughly the number of funerals I'd attended. And fortunately, that wasn't a big number. But I mention that because that is another example of really a side effect, I would say, of SSRIs is I wouldn't even call it a side effect. Again, they're doing what they're doing, keeping you in a range of emotion that keeps depression out of your day-to-day experience, but also, inhibits other emotions. And as you know, crying is good. Crying is healing. And one other little side story on that was a wake-up call at the time, but didn't lead me into this path yet. So what I mean by that is my kids are about 10 and 6. And one day my son said, "Hey, Dad, we've never seen you cry." And I was on the meds at that point. And my wife said, "Well, kids, I know what makes him cry. He cries every time he reads The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein," if you know that book, or maybe some of your listeners do. And she was right. I would read that book and just like I couldn't not cry. One time I actually tried. I'm like, "Hey, I'm just going to, for kicks, read this book and try not to cry just for fun." And I cried. But that was before I was on the meds. At this point, my kids are, they're wanting to see Dad cry. So we grabbed the book, and just if you can imagine, you have kids, reading the book, and they're like literally hovering over me, and like their hot breath I feel on my neck, and turning the page. And I wasn't trying to hold it in. I wasn't trying not to cry in front of my kids. I mean, they wanted to see that. And we get to the last page, which is usually where the waterworks open up for me in that book, and nothing. So they were upset. I was upset. And that's just to kind of illustrate the, kind of the price that I felt I was paying for being on these meds. And so bringing it into that first retreat, I was already starting to feel these emotions that I hadn't felt in a very long time. And that first retreat involved, so the guide is also an inner child coach. So the schedule was basically arrive and do a combo. So a combo session in the morning, and that was one-on-one, and then a group ayahuasca retreat that evening. And she just felt combo would be a good way to flush out my system, purge, which is, combo is a beautiful medicine in its own right. And then also just as an extra safety precaution, really, for being off the SSRI meds. And before she served me the combo medicine, she took me on an inner child journey, which is very similar to kind of how IFS parts works. And again, the floodgates open. So already I was, my emotional, kind of canvas was opening up. And then we kind of went into the retreat and combo. And then that evening, the group ayahuasca folks started arriving, and they said, you did combo this morning? Holy crap. Wow. That's quite a day you're having. And I was such a newbie. I was like, okay, sure. Like, and then that just led into the actual retreat, which I can speak, at length about, but it was beautiful. It was scary. The first night, I suppose I'll just dive into that a little bit, since we're talking about journeys and plant medicines, and this really was the first big milestone. So the first night was one of the most buoyant, happy, joyous experiences I've ever had in my life. I was literally laughing uncontrollably. It felt like kind of the old school recreational mushroom days, even though ayahuasca is quite different than psilocybin, as you know. And it was kind of like, well, this is great. wow, fun. And learning and working with my intentions. This is pretty freaking awesome. I did know enough to know that every journey is different, but nothing prepared me for that second night, which I would say was the most, to this day, I'll still say was the most terrifying experience I've ever had. So I actually really felt like it was past the point of this is uncomfortable and it's going to end. There was not even enough cognition to say this is going to end. It was kind of like this is my new
Wow.
reality. Yeah, um, it was scary. It was scary, but I came out of it obviously and learned a lot from it. One of the big takeaways I took was that the first night, grandmother ayahuasca was welcoming me to the medicine in a very, I'll just say, fun way. Welcome to plant medicines. And the second night, I was being shown the other side, and it was really showing me kind of that full spectrum of human emotion and view into our psyche and our soul. And the other way I looked at that was that the SSRIs, they're designed to kind of keep you in a mid range of emotion. And first night, she kind of showed me that high end, second night, low end. And so, kind of all together, I was now kind of being shown the full range of emotion that I really hadn't had, in the prior 12 years to that experience. So it was quite a weekend. Yeah.
What was the integration period like after? Had you prepared yourself to practice these integration involvements, or how did you process post that experience?
Yeah. So, fortunately, the therapist I had been working with was, had background and skills in with integration and psychedelic integration. So that piece was in place. And so I had been working with her leading up to it. And then I was able to just work with her right after it. So that was definitely a really positive piece of it because, as you know, and as we know, sometimes that piece isn't addressed. And then a lot of that healing opportunity is kind of left on the table. So I was fortunate enough to have that in place. And in terms of, I wouldn't I can't really put a time frame on it as in terms of how long it was. It's going to this day, but again, I was fortunate enough to have that, and as you know, that's such a significant piece to have to really maximize the value of these healing modalities.
Beautiful. How has music, played a role in not only your psychedelic experiences, but as an emotional and tool, and how does it play in your day to day life?
Yeah, so I love talking about music. We could spend the rest of the time talking about music. Um, so it started with me with some well referred to folks, the Grateful Dead, and now I'll be dating myself. So I did start seeing the dead in college, and that was my first mushroom experience. And then actually 2 days later saw the dead again, and that was my first LSD experience. So and from your old neck of the woods, one was in Philly and one was in Giant Stadium, New York, and so music has always been a big part of my life, and then getting into Grateful Dead and jam bands and bands like Fish and the String Cheese Incident and Billy Strings. And don't get me started because now I'll just start going on that tangent. But as it relates to this discussion, um, I could trace just about every good thing in my life back to music. I met my wife at a music club. Um, we share music together. She teaches yoga at music festivals, so we get to go to have some pretty amazing experiences around that. So it's music has just always, always been a part of. It's my happy place. We just go to lots of live music and really just have fun with that. And now, of course, we know how well that pairs with psychedelics, whether it's a recreational experience with psychedelics or a healing experience where music is such a big part of of the entire immersive experience that we can have between the medicines and the music.
Yeah, music. I mean, most ayahuasca ceremonies, indigenous music is such a huge part of the healing process there. What do you think it is about that helps either integrate these medicines or plays a role in the experience?
Yes, I mean, if so, music is such a big part of it, and especially if you're sitting in the with the Shipibo lineage, um, because you're being called up or you're hearing Ikaros, which is, you know, in the Shipibo language, and um, it really it can really draw emotions out of you. I mean, literally in my second retreat, the guide called me up and he said, because a common question is, you know, they come, how's the effect? How's the effect? Meaning, kind of like, do you need more? How are you feeling? I said, well, I'm feeling it kind of moderately, not really too strong yet. And he said, well, literally, he said, let's see if we can open you up. And I sat in front of him and he started singing Ikaros, which is, just for clarity, you know, it's sung in the Shipibo language. If you haven't heard that language, it's you kind of feel the tribal nature of it and the cadence of it and the chant. It's pretty wild. And I was sitting in front of him and he was singing these ikaros to me. And I just remember tears. It wasn't even evoking emotions in me or thoughts, or it just, tears just started falling. And so 10 minutes later, he said, so how's the effect now? And I said, no, now we're in it. And I went back to my mat. So, I mean, literally it was like that's just a prime example of the music literally tapping into the power of the medicine to draw it out. And then one Icaros later, and I was fully in the, you know, deep ayahuasca medicine experience.
Wow. Curious, my business partner and another reality sandwich contributor, Frank, big Grateful Dead head. What do you think is about that band in particular that either attracted or sparked the psychedelic community? Because I feel like they definitely didn't start out that way. Definitely more folk musicians a little bit to start, and then obviously this whole culture developed around them.
Yeah. So as you know, they started in the '60s. So I mean, they were in the, you know, epicenter of the counterculture, LSD, Haight Asbury, San Francisco movement, and this was at a point when LSD was legal or not illegal. And then good old President Nixon came in and made it illegal because people were having incredible LSD experiences filled with peace and love and didn't want to go fight in Vietnam. But that's a whole that's a whole other discussion. But you know, LSD and just that free flowing nature of that medicine or substance pairs extremely well with Grateful Dead music. And so there was just a lot of experimentation around that time, including what was called the acid tests, where literally they would just go all night and the band would be on heavy doses of LSD and so would the audience. And it was very experimental, and the fans basically gave the Grateful Dead, you know, the space and permission to be improvisational and experimental and not expect perfection and songs that last 3 minutes. And so the, you know, that kind of created this culture around that, and then allowed the Grateful Dead to really allow their music to unfold in a way that had not been done before. I mean, they are the godfathers of the jam band scene. And back then, it wasn't even called jam band; it was just the Grateful Dead. But now it's turned into, you know, a large segment of the music space. I don't mean like Beyonce large, but definitely bigger than one band in the '60s. Now it's hundreds of bands with big festivals and, you know, bands that can sell 40, 50, 60,000 seats. And here we are all these years, almost 60 years later, and Dead and Co., which is kind of the next incarnation of the Grateful Dead after Jerry Garcia's passing. They're selling out shows all over the place. They're playing Sphere. It's $300 a ticket, and they've done 30 or 40 shows there. So it's pretty amazing. And the band talks about this too, because they didn't have a grand plan for any of this. They
Mm-hmm.
were hanging out and seeing what these, psychedelics could bring into their music. And then here we are 60 years later, and we're still talking about the Grateful Dead, and they were just honored at the Kennedy Center Award. So it's kind of like they're really they're I wouldn't say they're mainstream, but everyone knows who the Grateful Dead is, right? Whether they like them or not, they know who they are. So it's gone from like this underground little San Francisco thing into something that has just unfolded into something that's incredible. Yeah.
Super rad. You recently, the nexus for this is you recently did another plant medicine ceremony. I'd love for you to dive really deep on that. Give me the setting, what led up to this, and now your post integration period.
Yeah. So 2022 was the first retreat that I shared, and I went on two more retreats that year. Um, what I noticed is that about a month after each one, my depression would come back. And I didn't necessarily think that this was a one and done. I knew this is ongoing work, but holy crap, it sucks when symptoms like that come back. And so that's what led me into two more retreats that year. And um, after that third one, a month later, sure enough, symptoms came back. And I decided not to go back into ayahuasca and I wouldn't say ride it out, but just see if how I could navigate through it through the other tools I had, which is therapy and yoga and breath work and love and support. I am blessed to have a really wonderful circle of loving family and friends. However, really things went from bad to worse. That whole last 3-4 months of 2022 were probably the lowest point. Not probably, it was absolutely the lowest point in my life. I would not say suicidal, but one step above. It definitely occurred to me that if I were suicidal and or if I didn't have the support that I had, I could see very clearly how someone that was suicidal would possibly take action on that. So it kind of I was in a very dark place, and I could even see what it would be like to be in a darker place. And so what I did next was to try ketamine. And for me, that and there are several kind of ways of using ketamine. So for me, it was going into a clinic and doing heavy doses of IM intramuscular ketamine. And the first stage of that is doing what's called the induction series. So that's 6 sessions over 2 to 3 weeks. And I walked into that first session, really deep, dark depression. And I walked out feeling instant relief, instant relief. Again, not concluding that, okay, I'm all good now, but at least just getting a lift, just feeling better. And again, and with that, I could also see how you could walk in suicidal and walk out not. Ketamine saves lives. And there are also pharmaceutical meds that can help with suicidality, but they can take 4 to 6 weeks. And that's if they work. So the amazing thing about ketamine is it can be instant. So I came out of that induction series feeling really, really good, really, really optimistic, really excited for kind of the next chapter. And I woke up that Monday kind of ready to rock and roll. And I was beset by terrible anxiety. And anxiety was kind of a new one for me. And when I say a new one, of course, we all have like day-to-day anxiety because we have stress but I mean like really, really debilitating symptoms. And so that then led to the next several months of kind of working with my anxiety. And really where I landed on that was that I'd done so much work around depression, and now it was kind of opening up these layers of anxiety. So it was again, disappointing, challenging, very frustrating, but that's where I was. And so I kept going to ketamine boosters every 3 to 4 weeks, staying in therapy and doing all the other things. And actually did that for 2 years, like through the end of 24. And it was actually after going to a conference in LA that I spoke at Awakenings conference, and that's then indirectly how you and I met through relationships. And I was sitting on a panel on psychedelics in business, which is something I'm passionate about talking about and I speak about. And I started becoming called to 5-MeO DMT or Bufo. I'd been somewhat curious about it. And I remember a friend a couple of years ago said she's really loves that medicine. And I said, well, how do you know you're ready? And she said, well, you have to feel called to it. And that's how I felt with ayahuasca. I was feeling called to it. But even when she said that, it was like, how do you feel? How am I going to feel called to Bufo? And then I was coming out of that conference, like, I need to learn more about this. And so I came back home and actually reached out to the guide I sat with for my first ayahuasca sit. And she kind of shared a little bit more about her work with that medicine. And I ended our Zoom call and checked my email. And I received an email from a newsletter I'm on saying next week there's a Q&A session in Denver all about Bufo. It's one of those synchronicities. In the past, I would have said, oh, that's just a coincidence. Now, too many coincidences to say that's a coincidence. That was, and by the way, it's a newsletter that I'm on and I like, but we don't always read our newsletters. So that one just popped in right at the right time. And I went to that Q&A session and, learned a lot more about that medicine. And that then led me up to going back out to California to sit with that same guide. And that was the end of January, February 1st. And so it was a 3-day, it really wasn't a retreat because most of it was one-on-one, but day one was a group combo session. And day two was a hypnotherapy modality called RTT, Rapid Transformational Therapy, which I had not been aware of, but I'll tell you that it's really incredibly powerful. And then the third day was Bufo, 5-MeO. And so I was definitely nervous, as we tend to get when it's a brand new medicine, no matter how much experience you've had with medicine A, B, and C. Right? If you have, you still don't know what you're going to get. But I was definitely excited for it. I knew I was in a safe place, and the container was safe, and it was absolutely transformational in every way. The experience itself, if I'm closing my eyes, that's because it helps me kind of conjure it back up again. It was beautiful. It was spiritual. It was full of love. I was talking to a friend who's a Bufo practitioner. He said, it's a love bomb. And yeah, it's a love bomb. It wasn't scary. A lot of people described it as scary. It wasn't for me, at least in this sit. The guide said, half the people who do this want to come back for a second round right away, half don't. I was in the former. I said, more please. And and I was just talking to someone this morning about Bufo, who described it the same way that I felt, and that another friend described it the same way. You just feel the layers of trauma melting away. And I'm pausing there because it's just, that was my experience. Hard to put into words. Ineffable, which is a word that means hard to put into words. And I say that because a lot of people, you say the word ineffable and they don't know what it means. And it's kind of funny that a word that means something that can't be described in words is a word that many people don't know the meaning of. And by the way, I was one of those people, and I have a pretty good vocabulary. So I think that's just kind of a funny word, but it is a word that makes sense with so many of these indescribable experiences. But I will share kind of what's unfolded. And this is now back to, integration, right? The theme that I brought in for myself and the intention was trust, and not in the sense of trusting other people. I'm trusting of other people. That's not an issue that I struggle with, but trust in the larger sense, trusting that the universe has my back. The universe is conspiring on my behalf. And when you're feeling depressed, anxious, that's very, very hard to tap into, even if you intellectually know it. Yeah, the universe is conspiring on my behalf, but I can barely get out of bed. So really, really, it's tough to make those themes align. And coming out of that experience, I feel that trust again. I'm leaning into that trust every day. And what also came out of that experience was helping me tap into why I'm here. And those three themes for me are being of service, experiencing joy, and having abundance. And abundance to my now self means a lot different, means a lot differently, or it embodies something a lot differently than growing up and wanting to be, a mega billionaire. And that's not what it's about for me anymore. It's about taking care of my family and really being able to serve this space and grow the healing space. So it just really helped me reset in so many ways. And now it's been almost 2 months as the time of this discussion here. And I can say that it's the longest stretch since I started this psychedelic healing journey that I've been really free from depression and anxiety. And so I celebrate that. And my wife definitely celebrates that because it's hard to live with. Well, it was hard to live with me for quite a while, but she stood by me. And so I'm so grateful to her for that. So I'm just really grateful to the medicine and grateful to all the work along the way, because all of this work is cumulative, right? So it wasn't just, okay, I finally did Bufo and that did the trick. I mean, it was everything leading up to that. And then, this Bufo experience that I had.
Beautifully put, Greg. Thank you for sharing that. Again, love hearing stories of how this medicine is realigning people and building healthier lives and relationships. Curious, how supportive was your wife? Is she also into plant medicines? Has she ever participated in a ceremony with you? I'm, in my relationship as well, I'm the psychedelic guy, and her side definitely thinks I'm the
Yes.
outlier here.
Yes. So our spouses would probably connect on the fact that their spouses, that's you and me, are the outliers here. So my wife is very spiritual. She's a health and wellness coach, specializing in executive functioning. Very deep, very sensitive, very compassionate, and has had a similar background in terms of recreational use of psychedelics, and especially as it relates to live music, as I shared. But she's not on the plant medicine path, but she supports it wholeheartedly. She supports my work in it wholeheartedly. And I just remember my first when I started purging in ayahuasca, thinking to myself, man, Lisa would not like this. And then I came home and described it to her, and she said, "This is not for me." And to her credit, I don't believe everyone needs or should use psychedelics. Like, she's good. She has her struggles, for sure. We all do. But, you have to feel called to it. You have to want it. And so that's where she falls on that spectrum. Sounds like
very
you can
similar,
identify.
story
Yeah.
there for sure.
Yeah.
Last night, I met up with a bunch of colleagues. We host psychedelic salons here in San Diego, and the topic was the commercialization of psychedelics. Now, obviously, to some people, that might be an oxymoron right off the bat. Why are we, even bringing the word commercialization to indigenous plant medicines, and is this stuff supposed to be helping us evolve into some sort of new system? But as an entrepreneur and community builder yourself, curious your take at the rapid, kind of industrialization, commercialization of these plant medicines and industry as a whole. There's more than just the plants. There's now all these ancillary businesses, people like you and I who service people in the space. There's real estate components with retreats and boutique wellness centers. I'd love your take on all that.
Yes, and this is a topic that is something I'm passionate about talking about. I speak about this. It's a topic that we need to be talking about, so I appreciate the question. And you're seeing this, as you shared, the circles you were traveling in and do travel in. There are a lot of thorny issues around this topic. It is, echoing off what you said, Kyle, trying to take ancient plant medicines that have been around for 4,000 years and fitting them into, how to take credit card payments for them. I mean, it's, and I just thought of that one right now, but that's kind of a funny paradigm, right? But that's in many cases what we're dealing with. And so many issues around that. And it's kind of funny when people say, oh, like ayahuasca is new. And that's because for a couple of decades, we, here in our Western culture know about it. But it's the only thing that's new are things like ketamine. Ketamine is new. So you have issues of accessibility, financial accessibility. That's already happening. And I work with clients. I have friends in Oregon. So Oregon is 2 years ahead of Colorado. So they've had healing centers, which they call service centers, open for about 18 months now, I believe. And they're facing these challenges because to go to an above ground healing center, service center costs about $2,500, $3,000, $3,500. And that's for prep sessions, the journey itself, which is 5, 6, 7 hours, and then integration sessions. So if you break that down on an hourly basis, it's not so much more than you'd be paying a therapist. It's just 10 to 15 hours of that work. And so there you have, do the math. So a lot of people have trouble affording it. It's not covered by insurance because it's federally illegal, just like cannabis. And so that's one challenge you have. And really one of the biggest issues is with awareness. So there are so many people who could benefit from these medicines, but they are either unaware of it, they've been misinformed about it, they're scared to do it, and then they might just not be able to afford it. Now, I just met with an Oregon healing center earlier today, and she said 60 to 70% of their clients are coming in from out of state. Some from as far away as Japan, Pakistan, Egypt, which is pretty mind blowing. But those folks can afford to travel and pay for that. So accessibility is a big, big challenge. Having said that, there are some amazing organizations that are trying to solve this problem. So there's a nonprofit called thankyoulife.org. They raise money to help people obtain ketamine therapy that may not otherwise be able to afford it. There's a new organization called Althea. So it's with althea.com. Althea also happens to be the name of a beloved Grateful Dead song, and it's actually how they were named. But I mention these organizations because they are addressing that problem. They're literally raising money to help the accessibility issue. And, then you have legalization issues. So different medicines have different legalization frameworks. For example, ketamine is federally legal, but it's legal off-label for mental health, and that's why it's generally not covered by insurance. So then you have that issue with that medicine and that framework. And so these are all serious challenges, but they're good people and good organizations doing good work, and just having these conversations keeps these discussions going because it's very much needed for us to have this movement grow and thrive.
Wonderful. Well, Greg, thank you for taking the time to share here today. Where can people follow you, get involved with any organizations or community you're involved with, and what do you have in the pipeline coming up that people can join in on?
Yeah, so some of the other work I do in the space, I'm the co-founder of the Colorado Psychedelic Society. So it's a nonprofit, and we started right after the legislation passed in 22. And you can just search Colorado Psychedelic Society, and you'll find us. You'll find us right away. We're a meetup group, so we do a lot of local events, but we also do non-localized events. We do virtual events, like we did one with Oregon, where they invited Oregon psilocybin facilitators to share their experiences doing this work as a profession, and shared some of the very real challenges that they're facing. But it was really helpful for our audience And this is free to join, by the way. We're a nonprofit, and so that's one organization that I co-founded and super passionate about. And we'll also be exhibiting at the psychedelic science event this summer and having a night event, and super excited about that. And I also own a web development agency called Gloss, so you can find me there at glosstech.io. So that's GLOSSTECH.io. And that site, it looks like a web development agency because that's what it is. What I'm launching in the next week or two is my own personal site, because my corporate site is fine, but 3 years into this, I'm now involved in so many other projects. So that'll be my name, gregshanken.com, GregShanken.com. And that will have, it'll feature a lot of the work I'm involved in and the speaking engagements I do. I also do training. So I do business web marketing training that I offer to psychedelic training schools. So these schools are doing amazing work at training students how to provide high quality psychedelic healing, but not necessarily how to be a solopreneur, entrepreneur, self-employed, get clients. So, you graduate and you're ready to get out there and heal, and this kind of gets back to your question about the commercialization. Well, you still need people to come and find you and pay you, unless you don't need that money. But so these skills are really necessary. So I partner with psychedelic training schools and offer these free trainings so they can get that knowledge that they really need to have so they can build a thriving practice.
Very, very
So
well put. That was actually one of our conversations last night discussing that. There are all these trainings out there, people paying $10,000+ for 6 month intensive, how to become a psychedelic facilitator, and they're not being armed with, okay, now what do I do after this? How do
yeah,
I
that's
help
right.
people and
Yeah,
actually run a business? Or they're hesitant to even collect money, right? I thought I wanted to help people. I feel icky taking dollars off of somebody.
yeah, and I hear that a lot. Um, I hear that a lot, and what I really share in my trainings is, well, first of all, you called out my hat. It says empathic on there. So this is the lens through which I help clients build their brands and messaging, because I'll meet a healer one on one or on Zoom, and I'll feel their skill, their compassion, their love, their desire to serve. And then I might go to their website and it takes 15 seconds to load, and then they don't have a headline, or it's a headline that doesn't speak to solving somebody's problem, and there are typos and broken links. And I see you smiling because I know you're in this similar work, and I see this in all industries, but in this one, it's even more important because you could be the most amazing healer in the history of the universe, but if I don't engage with your site and reach out to you for a consultation or a meeting, then you've lost your ability to share that empathy that you do have. And so my point on that was that for therapists, practitioners that have that icky feeling, what I coach them to do is tap into what brought you to this work, and that's your own personal story. And if you're coming from that place of empathy and compassion and your own story, that won't be icky. It won't be perceived as, I mean, you might have to get over your ickiness, like that's your work, as it like get out of your comfort zone and get comfortable with that. But your prospective client will feel that authenticity, and it won't be icky because you're sharing your story and how you can help, and that will resonate. So yeah, I just think it's super important, and helps bridge that gap also into as we get into the commercialization of this side of it. But therapists need to work on that skill really to resonate so that they can engage with people and heal them, which is why we're all doing this work. And then one more piece is um, that I'm actually now going through training to be a licensed psilocybin facilitator in Colorado. And that was definitely not on my radar when I started this work. It just, as I took each step, it just kind of brought me to that point. And so I'm really excited about the education I'm going through, and it's right here in Colorado. And it's, you asked me in the beginning about community. I didn't really answer that question. I can't speak highly enough about the value of community in this space, finding friendships, kindred spirits, shoulders to cry on, or being a shoulder to have tears spilled on you. Professional networking, right? So it goes from tears to how we can help each other grow our businesses, and the friendships that are created and the opportunities that come from it. That's how you and I met, through community and network and building our mycelial maps. And so just wanted to speak to that for a minute from the question you asked me in the beginning.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, so excited. Hope you'll be joining us at the upcoming MAPS Psychedelic Science Conference, and excited to continue to follow the work and community that you're building.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I love the work you're doing. The stories on your site, Reality Sandwich, are incredible. And so you've been a great steward of the work we're doing and helping us push this forward with your platform. So thank you very much. It's great chatting with you.